Hello everyone and welcome back. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for 1000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support, for liking and commenting my videos. It really means a lot. I also want to welcome all the new subscribers that I gained the past few days. So, I don't know how to celebrate it, and I'm leaving it all to you. Do you want me to make a very long compilation video? Do you want me to make a Q&A video or something else? So leave your comments below and I will make it happen. But for now guys, I think I should start with today's video, which is a compilation of old and new stories from my channel. So grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. Number 1. My mom's college boyfriend became her stalker after she left his awful abusive ass back in the mid-80s. Several years ago, just before the last Harry Potter movie came out, my mom and I were marathoning the other 7 movies, and at about 1 AM, the phone rings. Normally, we don't answer. We figure if it's important they leave a message. But a call that late at night is probably urgent. Mom answers and almost immediately her face changes, and she tells me, "Go wake up your father." Shit, I've never seen my mom this scared. I run upstairs and get him. Back downstairs, she's still on the phone, and I have no idea what's going on. Dad has some words with the caller, and we hang out in the kitchen. This is when I found out my mom had a stalker. Despite him being silent for years, and their whole breakup happening halfway across the country, he somehow found us. Said he'd driven by our house, complimented the neighborhood. Freaks me out to this day, wondering how much he knows about us, and if I ever talk to him without knowing. Number 2. The story you're about to read is true and not made up in any way. One of my friends actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed to go into counseling. I had 3 really good friends, and their names were Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy. Every summer, our parents would take us on vacation. We always stayed in a remote cabin in the forests of Minnesota. The cabin was located on a large island in the middle of Lake Vermilion. Eventually, when we were old enough, our parents let us go to the cabin on our own for the first time. When we got there, we parked the car on a gravel road beside the lake. Then, we had to take a boat across the lake about a half-mile to reach the cabin. There were a few other cabins on the island, but they were all at least half-a-mile away. The cabin was quite small, and it only had a kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. At night it was pitch black. There were no street lights for miles, and the only light came from the moon. There were no curtains on the windows, so when you were sleeping there at night, you could see the moon shining down on the trees and the lake outside. On the 3rd night of our trip, we set up a campfire by the edge of the lake. The moon was full, and the pale white glow was shimmering across the lake. We were gazing up at the stars, when all of a sudden we heard a splashing sound, as if something was moving about on the water. Ryan suddenly stood up and pointed, saying, "What the hell is that?" We all looked in the direction he was pointing, peering into the darkness. After a while, I could make out what he was pointing at. I'll never forget the feeling of terror that came over me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and goosebumps appeared on my arms. I was paralyzed with fear. Out in the middle of the lake, there was a woman's head. It was just floating there on the surface of the water, staring directly at us. She had pale white skin and long black hair that was matted across her face. The rest of her was submerged or not even there. We tried to tell ourselves it was just a loon. They're black and white birds that hunt at night, diving deep into the water. It didn't look like a loon, but that's what we tried to convince ourselves it was. We threw some more wood on the fire and tried to forget about it, but it still gave me the creeps. About an hour later, I had to go to the toilet, so I walked down to the edge of the dock and peed into the lake. Looking out over the moonlight lake, I noticed the thing was still there, but now it was much closer. It still looked like a woman's head, and it still seemed to be staring right at me. Its face was still extremely pale, as if it hadn't been out in the sun for years, and I could easily make out some facial features, the eyes and the nose. A feeling of incredible unease came over me as I realized it couldn't be a loon. There was no way a loon could tread water for that length of time. There were no ripples around it either. It wasn't moving at all. It was just standing there, stiff as a board, submerged in the water. I immediately zipped out my pants and ran back the dog to where my friends were, sitting around the campfire. I told them what I had seen, but none of them dared to go down the dock to take a closer look. We tried to tell ourselves it was just a log or a tree branch jutting out of the water. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. None of us really believed that. We went back into the cabin and shut the door, locking it behind us. It was very late and we needed to sleep. None of us mentioned the thing in the lake. We were all trying to avoid talking about it. There were no curtains on the windows, and as I was getting ready for bed, I couldn't help taking one last look. Peering out the window, I could see the lake clearly, illuminated by the full moon. But the thing wasn't there anymore. It had completely vanished. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking the log must have floated away, or else it just sunk below the surface. Or perhaps it had been a loon after all, and it had finally flown away. It was very hot that night, and we had to sleep with the windows open. My friend Tommy and I slept in one bedroom, and my two other friends, Kevin and Ryan, slept in the other bedroom. We left our bedroom doors open. I was finding it hard to sleep. It was the middle of summer, and there wasn't even a slight breeze. The heat was stifling. As I lay there, I thought I could hear someone walking around outside the cabin. I kept my eyes tightly shut and tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. It sounded like someone with bare, wet feet passing back and forth. I was trembling with fear, but I felt so weak I couldn't move. The footsteps sounded like they were walking up the steps to the cabin door. I wanted to shout out to my friends, but I was frozen in terror. Then the footsteps turned around and sounded like they were running down the steps and towards the lake. After a while, the footsteps faded away and there was only silence. I reached over and shook my friend Tommy. He was already awake and he claimed he had heard the footsteps as well. Just then, I was startled to see Ryan come running into the room. When he stepped into the moonlight, I could see his face, and the expression on it was very disturbing. "We need to leave," he said. "Why?" I asked. "What did you hear?" "Let's just go," he insisted. "Let's get to the boat. It's time to go." He wouldn't answer. He just ran back into his room. We followed him and found Kevin sitting on his bed already packing up his things. Ryan was running around, frantically grabbing his stuff and stuffing it into a bag. "What's wrong?" I demanded. "Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you? Tell us." He just stopped in his tracks and stared at me. There was a haunted look in his eyes. I will never forget what he said. He told us he was turning over in his bed to get more comfortable when he suddenly saw at the top right corner of his window someone was peeking in. As soon as he set eyes on it, the face vanished. He said all he saw was long black hair hanging down the window, ghostly white skin, and one large eye staring at him. When he said that, it chilled us to the bone. We realized that if the face was in the top right corner of the window, that meant the thing had to be damn near 8 feet tall, or else floating in midair. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Let's just go," Ryan said in a very serious tone. "Let's just go now." We all agreed and packed our stuff as quickly as we could. We grabbed our bags and ran out of the cabin. As we scrambled down the front steps, I glanced to the side and saw footprints, bare, wet footprints, in the dirt all around the cabin. We ran down to the boat and threw our stuff in. We untied the boat from the dock and sped off. I looked back over my shoulder and stared at the island, but I didn't see anything moving. However, I had the strangest feeling that someone or something was watching us. When we finally reached the other side of the lake, we tied up the boat, stuffed our backpacks in the car, and drove off. We had been driving for about 10 minutes, when out of the blue, Ryan suddenly broke down sobbing. He kept saying over and over, "What was it, guys? Oh God, what did I see?" On the way, we called our parents to tell them what had happened. Ryan was freaking out, and we didn't know what to do. They told us just to get home safely and quickly. My friend's dad went up to the cabin a few days later and said he saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, he did mention that there were wet, bare footprints all around the cabin, which he thought was odd. Whatever Ryan saw in the window really hit him hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping and ended up having to go into therapy. They gave him some pills to calm him down and allow him to get a decent night's sleep. As time went on, he recovered and ended up being fine. But to this day, he still can't sleep unless the curtains on the windows are completely shut. To this day, I still cannot explain what we saw in the lake that night. I never went back to the cabin. Tommy and Kevin have both gone back, and everything was fine. But Ryan refuses to go back, and I'm with him. Number 3. I was only 4 when this happened. Was playing outside with my siblings and neighbors, and while they're busy playing, a lady approached me and took me to her place. After a while, everybody was freaking out and they started looking for me everywhere. This lady was severely depressed. Her husband left her after their son died. He couldn't handle her depression apparently. She took me to her place, fed me, and gave me tons of candy for a couple of days. She also made me wear her deceased son pajamas. At some point, she took me to buy some candy from the store. The store owner knew her, so he reported that to the police. She didn't hurt me at all. The doctor even said I was well fed. I always think of her and pray she's in a better place now. Even tried to go visit her when I was a college student. Her house was sold and she moved away apparently. Number 4. This story is 100% true and takes place in 2004 while I was in basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia for infantry training. My company had just begun our field training exercise, which takes place towards the end of our advanced individualized training phase. It was the first night of our field training exercise. Our drill instructors pretty much had us implementing all the skills that we had learned so far in a mock combat environment. We were also run through tactical operations against other platoons from our same company. Anyways, like I said, it was the evening of the first day. I and my battle buddy, or teammate, we will call him Ted, were watching our sector from our improvised foxhole. It's pretty much a V-shaped dug out that you can lay low in and or slip in while watching a sector. We were trying to pass the time by whispering to each other, talking about what we would be doing once we got back home on leave. Our family, girlfriends. It was about 10 p.m. around this time. There was a sliver of the moon showing and a clear sky. It was also damn cold out, in February no less. So there we are shivering, laying in the ground, fighting to stay awake, when our subject gets to how creepy the woods are. From our position, we were up in a bit of a hill, with a small clearing in front of us about 15 feet or so. After that, it was nothing but trees and dark. Even with a small amount of light from the moon, we could hardly see 10 feet in front of us. We start talking about our favorite scary movies and creepy stories that happened to us when we were younger. This goes on for a good hour or so, until we can hardly stay awake anymore. I am fighting to keep my eyes open at this point, when I began to hear Ted snoring. I was so damn tired, and before I knew it, I must have fallen asleep. I had no idea how long I had been asleep, when I was suddenly woken up by someone saying my name. Johnson, Johnson, hey Johnson, wake up. I hear before I am suddenly jolted awake, thinking it was my drill sergeant about to yell at me for some reason. I jump to my feet, fumbling with my rifle in hand. I see a dark figure a few feet in front of me. My eyes focus for a second, and it's Ted. What the hell, man? I whisper, but with concern, thinking something is wrong. I need to take a piss, man. Come with me. Ted asks quietly, so quiet I can barely hear him. What? I exclaim, whispering. Man, you scared the shit out of me. To help you to go to the bathroom? I exclaim. I'm freaked out from earlier, man. It's creepy out here. Ted says. Dude, then go right there. I whisper. Come on, please. Just watch my back while I go over here. Ted waves his arm out towards the trees. As Ted points with his arm, I didn't realize this until afterwards, that his arm didn't move right. It seemed overly forced, like when you see a puppet's arm moved by a marionette. I begrudgingly say okay, and walk behind him as we enter the tree line. The moment I walked down from our position, I noticed that a layer of fog, or like a mist, had begun to form on the ground. Okay, go man, it's far enough, I whispered to Ted just a few feet into the trees. No, he answers in a monotone voice. I don't want anyone to see, he continues. I watch him march slowly deeper into the woods. This at the time didn't seem that odd to me, because Ted had always been the chicken and easily afraid between the two of us. So I continue to walk behind Ted about another 30 feet or so into the tree line before I demand, all right, go dude, it's far enough. No one can see you junk from here, sissy. No, Ted says again. Just a little bit further. I'm scared. When Ted says it this time, it sounds like he is struggling to speak, and like it's staticky. And he continues to walk deeper into the woods. I see the back of his head slam forward, and his left arm starts twitching. What the hell are you doing, man? Stop messing around and just go already, I demand to him. I get no reply from the figure oddly walking away from me. Whatever, man. This is too weird. Just find a tree and pee already. I'm going back. I stammer out as I start walking backward while watching him. I'm beginning to freak out just a little bit, and my alarm bells are going off. The harder I stare at him, and the further away I get, the stranger Ted appears to look. Like when static in your TV is disrupting the picture, so you can't quite make out the object. I decide I have enough and turn around to double time it back to the foxhole. I had only been about 25 feet away at this point. The hairs in the back of my neck start to stand on, and I can swear I feel something right behind me. I dive back into my position. When I dove in, I landed on someone who begins to yell at me. What the hell are you doing, Johnson? The person underneath me says as he throws me off of him. I look up, and it's freaking Ted, standing over me, weapon in hand, pissed off for landing on him. What? I stammer out, staring up at him like I have seen a ghost. I hurry to my feet, looking at Ted, and then to the forest, and then again at Ted, saying, But you were in... I can't even finish. I'm so lost for words. At this point, Ted interrupts, punching me in the arm. That's for landing your knee in my back, you dick, he says, beginning to get back into his side of the foxhole. I am at loss for words at this point. I'm staring at Ted, shaking and beginning to pour a cold sweat as I start turning in all directions, looking for another person from our platoon to jump out, saying it was all a big joke or something. But nothing. Just a dead silence now, almost no noise. Ted begins to snore again, easily going back to sleep. I eventually take my place next to him, thinking over and over in my mind what had just happened. Was I dreaming? I began to calm down after about 30 minutes or so, looking again ahead to the tree line, and then looking again at Ted's ugly, snoring mug. All of a sudden, I hear a horribly monstrous voice whispering in my ear, "I'm afraid." I turn my head to the trees, just as I catch a glimpse of something running off through the trees and off into the wilderness. I told no one about this for years, mostly because of how tired and worn out I was during this incident. I chose to think that I dreamt the whole thing. It was an easier truth to swallow than telling people I saw something that was my teammate trying to lure me off into the woods for God knows what reason. It didn't sound very good. Only recently have I told people of this story, because I'm sure that what happened was real. I'm just thankful to God that I didn't follow that thing deeper into the woods that night. Number 5. My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community of Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so started turning down a few streets with the van following every move. She started sprinting, and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. Hopped the fence and started banging on the back door. Dog in the house started barking at her, but no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. A car parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen early that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station. Number 6. I was driving home one night, as I had not seen my family for about 2 weeks. Filled with excitement, I decided to take a shortcut through a desolated area that I didn't know too well. I had heard stories about it, mostly ghostly tales, and I do, as a matter of fact, believe in ghosts. But my urgeness to surprise my wife and kids got the best of me. It was about 3:40 a.m. or so in the morning, and I had been on that particular road for an hour or so already, and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Suddenly, I get to an area packed with old creepy trees on the side and tons of shrubbery. As usual, my radio was on, and out of nowhere, this horrible static starts to crackle through the speakers. I started to feel chilly and uncomfortable. When, wouldn't you know it, I saw a man hanging from a tree on the side of the road. There he was. His body was even swinging from side to side. I stepped on the brake as fast and carefully as I could, but I kept looking through the rearview mirror, and he was still there. I grabbed my coat, my gun, and my flashlight, and I had my phone in my pocket, and I started to dial 911, but there was no signal. I made my way through the shrubs, and when I reached the tree, he was gone. I moved the flashlight around, thinking maybe he got free. I went back to my truck, looked back, and there he was again, hanging like I had seen him before. After this, let's just say, I didn't like taking shortcuts anymore. Number 7. This happened about 3 years ago or so. I was sitting in the kitchen and it was around 10 p.m. or so. I heard a really loud thump in the basement. I live alone with 2 dogs, so any sound is somewhat frightening to me. So as I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, I hear the thumping again in an oddly rhythmic pattern. I creak open the door into the basement bedroom, and I see my dog is just ramming his head and body into the wall over and over. I can't explain to you how shockingly unnatural looking it was. It looked like he was controlled or something. I called him over and he stopped and came upstairs with me. 3 hours later, I hear the thumping again. I get out of bed again. However, when I went down to check it, it was my other dog that was ramming his head into the wall. It was like he was possessed, scared the cheese out of me. Since then, nothing like that has happened. But what an unexplainable event. Number 8. One night, several years ago, I arrived home from the library and parked the car in the driveway. It was quite foggy, but the street lights were on, so I went over to the mailbox before going inside. At that point, I was not a believer in true scary stories, but what happened next changed it all. While fishing around in my mailbox, something I saw from the corner of my eye made me turn to the right. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, as a strange figure of a man was at the other end of the street. It was strange because he was just standing there, and I assume was staring straight at me. My fight or flight reflex kicked in, and I quickly made my way to my front door, with hair sprinkling on my neck. I unlocked the door, turned to have a last look and nearly fainted. The figure was now at the end of the driveway. Something told me to go inside and lock the door. Once inside, I looked through the window and he was gone. I was trembling in fear and couldn't decide whether or not to turn the lights on, but I continued to check the window. I almost jumped out of my skin when the neighbor's dog started barking loudly. My blood froze as I heard footsteps. Hearing the footsteps approaching my front door, I gasped and ran to look through the peephole. The front light wasn't on, but I could see the eerie light from the street, which was creepy due to the fog. Barely breathing, I stared through the peephole and squealed in fear when a dark shadow appeared. I was sure that it was a man wearing a white brimmed hat, only inches away from the door. I flipped the light switch and went back to look through the peephole. He wasn't there. I raced around the house and turned every light on, while I called 911 and waited for them to answer. Then the phone went dead. In a panic, I kept redialing, but it was pointless. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking in terror as I crept into the kitchen and grabbed one of my knives. The dogs had stopped barking, and for a moment I thought that the shadow man had disappeared. Checking all the windows and slowly calming down, I went to my bedroom and sat down on my bed. Early next morning around 3 a.m, something woke me up and I sat bolt upright, straining my ears. The silence was so deafening, but my beating heart almost hurt with the slowly building anxiety. Then the lights went out. I screamed and then leapt out of bed when I felt a cold breeze on my face. I ran through the house and then the light suddenly came on again. I checked the windows. Nothing. I stayed up until dawn. I never saw him again, and can't explain what happened. Ever since then, I've been afraid of fog, the dark, and strange men. Number 9. I've posted this before. Staying in a motel with my wife one night. She falls asleep really quickly, but for me, it takes a while to drift off to sleep. So I'm lying there in the dark for a while, and I hear a voice coming from somewhere in the room quietly, though just above a whisper, say, "I think they're asleep now." Immediate fright response. I bolt out of bed, turn on all the lights and start frantically searching the room. I look in the bathroom behind the shower curtain, under the bed, nothing. It's a one-room motel room. The door is bolted shut. There's nobody else in the room. My wife is now freaked because of my actions. What I experienced is called a hypnagogic hallucination, a not an uncommon experience during the initial stages of sleep. But if I had not known what that was, I would have thought the room was haunted. Number 10. I grew up with a very outdoorsy family. We always went camping and hiking in the summer. I grew up outside. My mother told this story to my sister and I about a time she went camping with my dad before we were born. I was in my tent, and it was the middle of the night, perhaps 1 a.m, and I had woken up to go pee, just like normal. I was about to unzip the tent when I heard a small scratching sound. I paused. It was a slow, deliberate, crunchy, digging kind of sound. It was too rhythmic for an animal, so after making sure it wasn't your father, who was sharing the tent, I unzipped a corner of the door and peeked out. The moon was just bright enough for me to see a young woman squatting right next to our little tent, digging at the ground with her bare hands. Even your father was scared, so he went and shined a flashlight on her and told her to go back to wherever she had made camp. The woman got up silently, leaving a 4-inch deep hole next to the tent, and started walking away. I went outside, went to pee, and go back into my sleeping bag. A few minutes later, I was awoken again by a clattering sound of a person or animal walking around where we had put our stuff. I looked outside again, and the woman was crouched low, walking around our stuff and looking at things the way a monkey might. Your father stepped out of the tent, shined the flashlight on her again, and she faced him. He asked her to kindly leave our stuff alone, but she stood there, dirty and neglected looking, staring at the night. He gave up and went back into her tent. Soon we heard her digging again at her little hole, which was literally 6 inches and 2 pieces of thin nylon away from my head. I shouted for her to go away, and she ran away and never returned. I fell back asleep, and in the morning our stuff was scattered, but nothing was stolen. Hey there, thank you so much for listening. If you liked this video, please leave a thumbs up, and if you like my videos and want to see more, subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget that me and Mortis Media are running a competition and 2 lucky winners will win 2 exclusive signed prints of the artwork you see now on screen. For details on how to participate, check the description. And I will see you all in my next video.